Janet over there, she's the unruly one. So a couple of quick things. Microphones, if it's red, we can hear you on YouTube. So make sure it's red when you talk and not red when you're not meaning to talk. I'm pretty sure you guys all have that, so we should be good there. Awesome, and then I will go ahead and call this meeting to order. It's 6:30 p.m. The Board of Adjustments on September 25th. Kay, would you mind doing a roll call for us?
Russ Quizwell.
Here.
Mitch Haas.
Here.
Jeff Dickinson.
Here.
Mike Matheny.
Here.
Mark Chain.
Yes.
Janet Buck.
Here.
Jack Wheeler.
Here.
Awesome, thank you, guys. And then the first order of action is appointment of a chair and vice chair. So I kind of threw a couple items in the first memo. Normally the chair will obviously call the meeting to order and do all the roll call, but since we don't have a chair, since the Board of Adjustments hasn't met in 5 years, I figured I would take that on for you. So essentially anybody can nominate anybody else as the chair. I think we'd prefer it to be a regular member as opposed to an alternate. Then we're just looking for a second to the nomination. And then as long as the nominee doesn't outright reject being the chair, we can do a roll call vote, and then I can hand the reins over to the soon to be new chair, and then we can elect a vice chair. So I don't know if anybody wants to nominate anybody.
Who are the
or
alternates,
questions.
just to be clear?
So the alternates are Janet and Jack, and the regular members are Russ, Mike, Mitch, Mark, and yourself, Jeff. No. Pure randomness.
Paper left in the printer.
Essentially.
I'd like to ask if anybody wants to do it.
Would you be willing to do it, Russ?
No.
It's a good start. We're down one.
The duties of the chair, essentially, running the
Honestly,
meeting and closing things and calling votes and things like that.
essentially, yes. We might have a couple conversations with myself outside of the meeting if there's a scheduling question but it's pretty minimal. You'll do it?
I'd nominate Mark Chain.
Do we need a second?
So we've got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All against? None. Passes unanimously. And then we can vote on a vice chair. If anybody wants to be a vice chair, in case Mark decides he's gonna just go.
You're gone.
I'm gone for 6 months a year, if that matters.
You can zoom in, right, from the boat?
How about Mike? Well, thank you.
I could handle the vice if
All
that's.
right, I would recommend, nominate Mitch.
Anybody want to second that nomination?
Second.
Awesome. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, passes unanimously. So Mark, I'll turn the meeting over to you. If you wanna
Sorry, Mark.
run us through persons present. I will just let you know that we do have Ann here. She's a new member to the Planning and Zoning Commission. And so she's here to listen in on the first item, the new member training, and getting some of the legal background so that we can get her up to speed. Susan Ryan.
Oh, who's the new member? I'm confused.
So
Oh,
Ann
over
Kramer.
there, okay.
I'm gonna come up just for this.
Sure.
I didn't want to intrude.
Okay, so we've done the appointment of the chair and the new chair.
Got your mic on?
Do we have any public?
Sorry,
Your
my
mic on,
cord's
Mark?
in the beginning.
Mike.
Mike. Thank you. You're
Sorry.
good.
Catch me with that one. Okay, the next agenda item is public comment for persons not on the agenda, and hearing none, let's move to next, which is new member training. And I thought maybe Mark Hamilton would be here, and he obviously is not. So I will turn it over. Jerry can introduce you because
So Mark is currently still on sabbatical.
He is, yeah. So I'm doing my best Mark Hamilton impersonation.
We have Susan Ryan, who's also a partner with Holland and Hart.
You need to lean back a little bit.
Yeah.
There we go.
I didn't wear flip-flops, so.
he's on sabbatical again.
You know, it's what, once a year or?
No, you know what?
Yeah.
It's a great thing. It's
It
needed.
is.
And it helps prevent burnout sort of. And it's a good thing. So good for him.
Yeah, I mean, we're super fortunate the firm still offers that opportunity. I'm just anxiously waiting when I can take mine. But in the meantime, I've been covering town of Carbondale work all summer. So Jared asked me to come tonight and kind of give everybody a legal training. So that's why I'm here. My goal is for this to be kind of informal. I have a few topics that I want to cover with everyone, but if you have questions or specific concerns while I'm talking, feel free to interrupt me and we can make this a conversation. So I thought I would start by just talking about the types of decisions that local governments make, just to kind of set the stage for the work that you'll do as a Planning and Zoning Commission member and a Board of Adjustment a member. So the first type of decision is kind of the decision that's on this end of the scale. And those are the decisions made by the Board of Trustees. So those are policy level decisions. They're legislative decisions that are made presumably in the best interests of the town. So on this side of the scale, there's a ton of discretion. A Board of Trustee member can make a legislative decision without hearing evidence, without even citing to anything in the record. They just have that sort of authority and discretion to make those sort of decisions. And again, those are legislative policies, and the idea is that they apply generally. So they're not typically directed at an individual person or directed at an individual property. They would apply to the town in general and everybody living in the town. On the other end of that scale, we have staff level decisions, and the staff is really vested with putting the board's legislative policies and decisions into practice. So when we look at staff level decisions, they have the least amount of discretion. They're really tasked with taking what the board has done, applying those standards, and they apply them to specific people and specific property, but they don't have a ton of discretion of how to apply those standards. Then in the middle, that's where all of you come in. And we have those decisions which refer to as quasi-judicial decisions. So you don't have as much discretion as the Board of Trustees, but you have more discretion than the staff. So when we say quasi-judicial, what it means is that you're really making decisions about specific people and specific properties that are coming in front of you. You're basing your decisions on standards. So you're going to look at the Unified Development Code to inform your decisions, but you're also going to hear evidence from people who are appearing in front of you during a hearing, and you can base your decision on that evidence. So that's where your discretion comes in. You're looking at the standards, but you still have discretion to make some of these decisions. But because you're in a quasi-judicial role, there's an extra level of formality to the process and to the decisions that you're making. So it's really important that we follow clear rules of due process to ensure that there's fundamental fairness. And I'll say that concept, fundamental fairness, over and over again. That's really what we're trying to achieve with kind of these rules and understanding the quasi-judicial role. So I thought I might give you some examples of quasi-judicial decisions. I think probably all of you know what examples are, but a few that come to mind are rezoning applications, subdivision applications, variance approvals, or something that would come in front of the Board of Adjustment in particular. So those are examples of decisions that you would make. All of those would involve specific properties. So kind of the keys to making sure we're creating a process that's fundamentally fair is, the first one is public notice. Making sure the public knows you're going to have this hearing, they know you're going to make this decision, and they have a fair and meaningful opportunity to come in front of you and give you their position. The second important part is having a hearing that is also fair and gives everybody a meaningful opportunity to participate. And the idea is that by doing all this, you're going to make a record-based decision that someone reviewing it could say, okay, this decision was made by fair and impartial decision makers, regardless of whether or not they agree or disagree with your decision. What we're trying to achieve is fairness and due process. And when I say we're trying to achieve that, we're trying to achieve that because if the town gets sued, because somebody doesn't like one of the decisions you made, it's really important for me as your attorney to have a very clear record that I can present to the district court judge and say, look, we were fair, we noticed this properly, all the decision makers were impartial, they didn't have conflicts of interest, they weren't biased, they made very clear findings based on the evidence in front of them. So that hopefully that helps you have some context as to why it's really important to make sure this process complies with due process and fundamental fairness. Are there any questions about that so far? Okay. So I thought I just would talk for a minute about the role of the Board of Adjustment. I think some of you have served on the board before, or maybe not. So you probably know, I mentioned variances earlier. I think that's one of your main roles, to hear and make decisions on requests for variances. You also have a role in making judgments on appeals from administrative decisions. And I just wanted to note, for the Board of Adjustment, it's different for planning and zoning, but for the Board of Adjustment, any appeal of your decision goes to the district court. It doesn't go to the Board of Trustees. That's distinct from planning and zoning. When the Planning and Zoning Commission makes the decision, any appeal of that decision would go to the Board of Trustees and then to the district court. So let's talk about what does it mean to create a process that's fundamentally fair and complies with due process. Due process, as you probably know, comes from the Constitution. And it's this idea that no person will be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. So here, we're primarily talking about property interests and making decisions that impact people's property interests, which kind of implicates this constitutional requirement for due process. So the first part of it, and I mentioned it, is notice, public notice of the meeting and providing meaningful opportunity to be heard at the meeting. So public meetings kind of implicate open meeting law requirements. Sometimes they're referred to as sunshine laws, or now it's Colorado open meetings laws. So it's important to understand what an open meeting is and when you're having a meeting that's subject to the notice requirements. So the open meeting laws in Colorado apply to all local public bodies, which means any board, committee, commission, authority, it applies to everyone in this room. So that's the important takeaway here. You're subject to Colorado open meeting laws. A meeting is defined by statute as any kind of gathering convened to discuss public business. And this gathering is convened when you have 3 or more members of a commission or a board, or a quorum, whichever is less. So it's really important to remember that if 3 of you are going to go out to breakfast and talk about something that's in front of you, that's a public meeting. It's subject to the notice requirements. And if you don't comply with their notice requirements when you do that, it could be a big legal issue later on. I think a more common example is site visits that you see, where a property owner may reach out to several of you and say, hey, I really want to show you my property. And if you just came and look at it, you would understand what's going on. So if 3 of you went to that property to take a look at it at the same time, that could be construed as a public meeting that would have been required to be noticed. And there's no problem with noticing it. You know, if you want to do a site visit and you think that would be meaningful, you certainly can do that. It's just that we need to be sure if you're going to do that, that we provide the public notice in that the way we need to. So people who are involved or may want to participate know that you're doing that and they can come if they want to. Does that make sense? Sure.
What if it's like unintentional? Like, because I know at the P and Z, we talked about one of the kind of rules for how we'd like to conduct ourselves was that it'd be important for people to make site visits on themselves. But what if I happen to pick a time that other people also pick to swing by and look at something we would be voting on? I guess where does that fall?
So I think it's kind of a gray area, but I think if there were 3 or more members from P&Z or a quorum, you would need to be careful about continuing with the site visit. I mean, my recommendation as your legal counsel is that you should probably remove yourself from that
Okay,
situation.
so if you pull up and see 2 other people, it's not a good time.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I know it's kind of a pain,
Yeah.
and it sounds kind of minor, but I think the
No,
easiest.
it's important.
It
I
is,
get it.
yeah. And so that's why, like, I think as you're looking at these issues and these cases in front of you, if you think a site visit would be helpful, you know, I would suggest maybe as a board or a commission, just talking about that and saying, okay, well, let's just notice the site visit. That way you can notice it, you can pick a time that works for everybody and everybody has the right notice.
If something's in the front of the property, you just go by and look at it.
Right.
But if it's in the back.
Yeah, we should get permission.
Property, right.
Right, yeah.
Now, it's not all right to have a group go visit a property but not talk.
It would still fall, if it's 3 or more members, even if you're not talking, it's still subject to that open meeting notice requirement. I will talk about talking at site visits. So if you are going to go on a site visit, it's still kind of important to remember that you shouldn't take evidence at a site visit. So the purpose of the site visit is really to kind of look at the property and understand the context. And I think sometimes it can slide into, you know, somebody asking you questions or somebody trying to influence how you might decide the issue in front of you. And so what I would advise you is to just be really careful of that and set a clear standard for the site visit before you start. I mean, you could pick one of you to say, listen, the purpose of the site visit is for us to view the property. We're not going to be answering questions today. If you want to give us input, the appropriate forum is this public hearing scheduled for X and X date and time. And I would encourage you to do that, even if you feel like people are asking you pretty simple questions. In my experience, those can kind of snowball into more complex questions. So somebody could engage with you and be like, hey, what do you think of this sidewalk? And then that could, you know, turn into an issue in the case. So I would just urge you to be a little cautious about answering even simple questions. Yeah.
If there is a site visit and it's a public meeting, does someone need to take minutes or notes? Because I see that happen a number of times, especially with the county level, when there's people pro and con there before you know it, there's 25 people. Take minutes.
Yeah, I would recommend that you take minutes. And it'll be easier to take minutes if there's not a lot of talking. So that's another reason to just kind of stay silent. But I think it could be helpful for the record just to document that you had the site visit, you have a list of people who attended. And again, when you think about it, this is how I think, because I'm a lawyer, I'm always trying to create the clearest record I can for a judge. And so if anything you do gets appealed, the judge is going to look at it just on paper in complete isolation. So it might be easy for us at the time to be like, oh, of course, like, we know this property and it makes all the sense in the world, but the judge isn't going to know that. And the judge isn't going to see the property or really understand the context of it. So we're trying to really make a clear paper record. Any more questions about public meetings? Ooh, and the other thing I would say, if you ever have a question about it, you know, you can always reach out to me or Mark and we can advise you on, you know, what to do if you're concerned about a site visit or anything else. And I know you talked about accidental contact. That's a time to reach out to your attorneys too and just say, hey, this issue came up, what should I do? And we can advise you about the proper way to handle it. Okay, so the next issue I wanted to talk about is conflicts of interest. So that basically means you should not participate as a Board of Adjustment member or a Planning and Zoning Commission member in a decision or a hearing if you have a financial or other personal interest in the matter. So what does that mean? It can mean a lot of different things. If you have a really immediate relationship with somebody who's appearing in front of you, that's always a conflict of interest. So like a spouse, a child, a very close relative, that would pretty much always be a conflict of interest. If you have a financial interest in the matter that's in front of you, that would also be a conflict of interest. So that would be, you have some sort of gain or loss by the decision that the board would make. I think the grayer areas are, what if you have a really good friend who's appearing in front of you and asking you to make a decision on their property or an issue that they're having. And that issue does come up a lot in a small town where everybody pretty much knows each other. I would say, under current law, friendship in of itself is not a conflict, but it can depend on the circumstances and the facts and how close of a friend it is. So that's something to keep in mind. So if you think you have a conflict of interest, but you're not sure, you should talk to Mark or I before the hearing, and we can kind of talk it through with you and advise you as to what we think. The best practice is always to disclose the conflict on the record. So in the open hearing, say what you think the conflict is, say why it's a conflict. And ultimately, I can advise you, but you can ignore me. If I tell you you shouldn't participate in the hearing and you want to, you don't have to follow my advice. So if that's the scenario and you decide you still want to participate, I would tell you to disclose the conflict very clearly. Say for the record why you're still impartial and why you can make a fair and unbiased decision, and explain why you feel comfortable proceeding as a decision maker.
I can add there, another resource besides just Mark and Susan would be myself. Feel free to reach out
yeah.
to me. We're happy to answer questions on that. I think one thing, because we do have alternates, is we try to be relatively conservative here in Carbondale on both the Board of Adjustments and the Planning Commission. So if there's an appearance or the potential for an appearance of a conflict, we have other members who can act. We can still have a quorum 99% of the time. And so the safest route, just to keep the town out of lawsuits, would be just recuse yourself from that agenda item and let the rest of the board act on behalf of, or make whatever decision needs to be made. And sometimes there are some minor things I've seen on the Planning and Zoning Commission where a commissioner would bring it up, and then the other commissioners will kind of ask some questions and say, well, are you really impartial on this? Can you really make an objective decision? And then sometimes the other Planning and Zoning Commissioners or Board of Adjustment members might say, we'd really like you to recuse yourself, or no, we think you can make a decision on this. And so that's kind of another check and balance on that.
Yeah, those are good points. I always advise clients to put yourself in the shoes of the people appearing in front of you. You know what I mean? Like, how would they feel if they heard about your potential conflict of interest? Would they think you could still be fair or impartial, or would they see it as a conflict? That can be another kind of check on yourself to make sure you're treating it appropriately. Any more questions about conflicts of interest? Okay, I'm going to move on and talk about ex parte communication, which basically is kind of a fancy Latin legal way of saying don't speak with one side or the other before you're in the formal hearing. So the idea is you don't want to be having breakfast with the applicant who's going to appear in front of you in a public hearing the next day. That would be ex parte communication. And there's kind of two levels to it. So the actual communication would be if someone is talking to you about what's in front of you and what you have to decide, that's where the communication comes in. But the other thing to be aware of is just the appearance. We call it the appearance of impropriety. So let's say you were going to have breakfast with an applicant and that applicant was scheduled to appear in front of you for a hearing the next day, but you didn't talk about the matter that's in front of you, just talked about other things. It still implicates an appearance of impropriety because if somebody involved saw you having breakfast, they might assume, oh, well, this person has the ear of this Board of Adjustment member and what are they saying? And, am I going to be treated fairly? And I didn't have the opportunity to have breakfast with them and that's not fair to me. That goes back to that fundamental fairness idea where we want to treat everybody exactly the same. We kind of already talked about it. I think the risk with the site visit, there is a pretty big risk with the site visit, having ex parte communication, especially if only one side appears for the site visit. But you can eliminate that by not allowing people to really talk to you during the site visit or not answer questions. Just kind of keep it as a site visit. The other thing I would mention is, as far as ex parte communication, it can include engaging with other board members prior to the public hearing. So you don't want to be having conversations with each other in an attempt to influence how you're going to make a decision before you have the public hearing. That's also considered ex parte communication because the idea is it's not fair, right? Like the public doesn't have an opportunity to comment. The people involved don't have an opportunity to give their position before you make that decision. I will say, if ex parte communication does occur, and it probably will, I would expect that people would email you or try to kind of engage with you about issues and applications that you're deciding. So when that does happen, I would advise you just to say what I said before, like, oh, thanks for being so interested in this. I can't really speak to you about this, but the appropriate time for you to tell me what you think is at this public hearing on this day and time.
Is it good to send that email correspondence to staff or the attorney just so it's disclosed that somebody did reach out?
Yeah, I do think that's good. It's definitely good to loop Jared and the attorneys in. So we're aware of the issue. And yeah, I would recommend that you do that.
I had the same question. Send that on to staff and then they can give it to other board members so it becomes part of the public record.
Yeah, there's no problem with making that part of the public record. It actually helps the public record just to kind of lends credibility to the fundamental fairness of the process. Sometimes you might find that people won't take no for an answer. So you might get repeated phone calls or repeated emails or, with people just kind of like, no, I really need to talk to you about this before the hearing. So in that regard too, it's good to kind of build a paper record on how you're communicating with that person and what's been said, just in case there's an appeal or something, there's no issue. Like we just have the paper, we can say, look, this is what happened clearly.
Why you brought up emails, an important thing I think to remember. A lot of times the communication will come from staff or it could be the attorney or somebody and everybody's copied. And if you have something, important to say or touchy or a question that could get people thinking in one direction, don't hit reply all, hit like reply to Jared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a good point.
Or to Holland and Hart.
Yeah.
Don't go and say, hey, this person's a jerk, whatever it is.
Totally.
You may have 9 people or 7 people, 5 people that are infected and then get real vexed.
Yeah. Yeah. If you don't want it in the public record, I mean, just that's how I always think about it. What do you want to be presented about yourself in the public record? And what do you want your communications to look like when it gets to the public record? And it's the same process with ex parte communications as conflicts of interest. If you have been involved in ex parte communications or someone's even attempted to communicate with you in that way, what I recommend is that you disclose it at the beginning of the hearing. So it's on the public record. You say who it was, when the contact occurred, and how you responded to it. And then that would be a good time to say, I sent the email to my town attorney. I sent it to Jared, and here's the email. And that way we can get it cleared up in the record.
Yeah, last night at the trustees, one of our trustees, Jess Robeson, disclosed that the property owner for one of the applications they were hearing reached out to her and wanted to have coffee and talk about the project. And she said, I can't talk about it. It's an active application. And that was it. But she still disclosed it on the record. And all the trustees said, sounds great. Please continue to participate. And just made sure it was all above board. So a good example. So, I don't think there's anything wrong with somebody attempting to reach out, and there's nothing wrong with saying, can't talk about it, and then just let everyone know in the public record.
Yeah, it would encourage over disclosure of these issues rather than under disclosure. All right. Any questions about conflicts of interest? Okay. So, the next topic I'm going to talk about is impartiality. And what does that mean? And that basically means that you haven't made up your mind before the public hearing. And that's just important to keep in mind that any decision you make can only be and has to be based on the evidence that you hear during the public hearing. And that's really kind of the goal with being impartial, right? It's not influenced by something you heard the week before. It's not influenced by a conversation you had with somebody. It's based on evidence, and evidence that you can cite to, evidence that we have in the record, evidence that's clear, and evidence that supports the decision that you're making.
But the packet you read before the meeting.
You do, it's true. But
You base your opinions based on reading the packet.
well, that is true. Yeah, but ideally you haven't read the packet and made a decision. You're still going into the hearing with an open mind. And you might be thinking, well, I read this and I think I'm going to go this way. But the idea is that when you sit in that hearing, you're still impartial and you can still take in the evidence that's presented in front of you without kind of being closed off like, oh, well, I read the packet, so and I don't even need to hear what you have to say. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So
It's okay to read the packet.
yes, you should read the packet. Jared will be upset if you don't read the packet. And the packet's part of the record too. So when you make your decision, you can cite to the evidence that you heard, but you can cite to the packet too as part of it.
It's not good to read it while.
That's true. So along the lines of being impartial, part of that is not making statements in public or otherwise that could be deemed to be prejudicial before the hearing. So you wouldn't want to say at a dinner party, oh, I read the packet and have this interesting issue coming up in front of me and I've already decided this is what I'm going to do. I mean, that's a very extreme example, but you get what I'm saying. We really want the process to be fair and impartial. And so I think you need to be really cautious about making those sorts of statements. And I think it can be easy to kind of slip into, right? Because people could ask you like, hey, what's going on with this? Or is this issue in front of you? And I think it can be tempting to say, oh yeah, it is. And here's what I'm thinking. But my legal advice is don't do that. Just avoid that conversation. Just try to shut it down and say, I can't really talk about it. If you want to weigh in or listen, the public hearings this date or time. So we kind of talked about this already, but just to reiterate, when we're talking about disclosure and recusal, if grounds for recusal exist, and that would be a conflict of interest, ex parte communication, or any other reason that you feel like you can't make an unbiased, fair decision, the procedure is to talk to the town attorney as soon as possible, like as soon as you're aware of a possible issue, and we can help you sort through it. And then at the start of the hearing to disclose what the issue is, explain it in pretty good detail. I think we want a significant amount of detail about the issue for the record. And then, if it's a minor issue, like Jared was saying, and everybody maybe feels like, you can go ahead and proceed, we have a clear record on it, and that will kind of eliminate that issue as a basis for appeal later on if the record's super clear on that disclosure. All right, any questions about that? Okay, and my last topic is how to conduct the hearing. And I'm just gonna make a few points, and this mostly just goes to having a clear record for the appeal. I would recommend that you use the same procedure for every hearing. That way people will know what to expect. You kind of have a clear agenda, you have a clear procedure, who's gonna talk first, who's gonna talk second, when the public's gonna have an opportunity to talk. It's just the same every time. So I don't know if you have that in place already, but if not, I'd recommend, maybe considering how to have a clear procedure like that.
Yeah, so generally the procedure is on an agenda item, staff will present kind of an overview of the staff report. You can ask technical questions of the staff report and the staff memorandum. And then we offer the applicant an opportunity to present anything they would like to present. And again, then technical questions of the applicant. Then we allow the public, open the public hearing, allow the public to provide any comments they have. Generally in Carbondale, we try to limit those to 3 minutes, but it's also at the discretion of the chair. If there's only one member of the public and you want to let them go a little bit longer, you can certainly do that. And then after that, close the public hearing and then enter into commissioner dialogue. And generally that portion of the meeting should just be among the commission, but there are times where questions or staff will provide some context, some feedback, and there are times where the applicant has feedback that they can provide in that. And so there sometimes is a little bit of dialogue, but typically we like to try to keep it to the deliberation of the board and then ultimately some sort of motion.
Do we not afford the applicant an opportunity to respond to the public comment?
You can. I think that's at the discretion of the chair. But yeah, I think that is a good addition, Mitch.
Okay,
I would always allow that. I mean, not as chair, but
right.
whatever my role was. Just people who know me, I've been on the public side for almost 20-something years, and I've been on the private side. So, but I think just like staff sometimes, has the right to respond to charges or whatever, and same thing with an applicant. Now, are the rules for the public hearing, are they still posted over there? I can't read from this angle.
Yes, there are.
About being polite.
Yes, I think there is something on there about being polite.
And then Susan, I have a question.
Sure.
About, different places close a public hearing at certain times. Sometimes it's only when the public comment is coming up. If nobody's there, then you open up the hearing at 7:07. If you close it at 7:08, I've always thought that the hearing goes for the length of the agenda item, because it's just easier to continue. You haven't closed and created some kind of weird discussion, which sometimes happens. So any guidance on that?
I mean, I tend to agree with that approach, just keeping the hearing open for the duration of it and not opening and closing public comment necessarily throughout. I guess I would say it's important to manage the record on that point though. So I think you just want to be really clear about like, okay, now we're going to allow for public comment at 7:07. No members of the public are here. So we're going to move on and allow the applicant to present. And then if a member of the public walks in at 7:15 and you decide you want to allow that person to comment, just say it's now 7:15 and this person from the public's here. So we're going to allow them to comment. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the way I've always figured it goes too. And if there's a public comment and then that's done, and then the applicant responds. I don't think you go back to the public to respond to the applicant's response because it'll go on
No,
forever.
yeah.
Yeah,
You know, but-
totally.
But if someone shows up late,
Yeah. And I mean, I guess I would think too, maybe just logistically, like when you've heard from everybody and you're in your deliberations, then if a member of the public shows up, I think you still have the legal discretion, and it would be fine if you wanted to hear from that member of the public, but as a matter of process, then you might need to let the applicant speak again. Do you know what I mean? You're kind of like kicking it back to the beginning. Just something to keep in mind.
And the chair controls that dialogue.
Mhm.
That's
Yes.
what's important. They can ask staff or the applicant for clarifying
Mhm.
or additional
Mhm.
information.
And they can ask too, if any of the other board members have any questions, I think it's just really important, and I do feel like people always forget this, to be clear who's talking, what they're talking about, first name, last name. Because it can be easy when you're in the moment just to know like, oh, this person's talking, like everybody knows who it is. But then when you look at the paper record, a lot of times you can't tell who is talking, if they're on the board or a member of the public, you know what I mean? And so we're always just trying to make sure everything we do is really clear on paper. And that another point is just to make sure people don't talk over each other and just allow people to fully finish their thought before the next person
I think
chimes in.
Kay would appreciate that.
Yeah.
And people should be recognized by the chair or the vice chair or whoever.
Mhm.
And I always think it's a good point. I mean, especially if it's a large public hearing or a contentious public hearing, that all the comments are addressed to the chair or the vice chair or whoever's running the meeting,
Mhm.
and not to the applicant or staff. And then the chair goes and, hey, Jared,
Mhm.
Kay, whoever,
Yeah, that's a really good
Yeah.
point. Mhm.
because it can get pretty dicey sometimes.
Yeah,
I have a question for you.
sure.
When things get continued, and I've seen it happen where something gets continued because they want to change by the applicant, is there advisement on how to handle the public comment section? Because usually that's after the public comment has closed. It might come after discussion, and they say, hey, we want to see this changed, and they, change it. Do you need to open public comment again because the application has changed, or has that taken place and it's just based on discussions and decisions that came from that public input?
I think it depends on how the hearings continued. So if there's a motion to continue the hearing, which is the appropriate procedure, and it's continued to the next agenda, and it's continued as a continued public hearing on the issue, then I think the next time the commission or the board convenes, you're back in the public noticed procedure. You know what I mean? So even though it's a small change, I think it would be appropriate to allow the public an opportunity to comment on it. I guess I'm thinking if it's, and sometimes it can be a really minor change, that doesn't necessarily need to be continued for another public hearing. So if it's not continued for another public hearing, if it's just continued for staff to make a tweak to the ordinance or that conditions of approval, then I don't think it's necessary to notice it again as a public hearing and have the opportunity for more public comment. Does that make-
Reopen the public hearing at the next meeting if it was closed?
Well, if the matter was continued, by virtue of continuing it, when you call it at the next public hearing, it kind of reopens the whole thing. It's kind of just semantics. I mean, you could reopen the public hearing too,
I
but
think, yeah,
yeah.
I think in practice, the planning commission has largely reopened the public hearing each meeting because they tend to continue the public hearings as opposed to not continue it. And I think that's generally good. It gives the public an opportunity to continue to state their feelings on an application. I think it's good, just open meetings. So I think the majority of the time on Planning and Zoning Commission, you'll have continued public hearings. The chair will tend to reopen that if people want to speak.
For the record, I'm for that. I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure I had standing. And they'll hate me for it, but that's okay.
If anything, this community has always been, yeah, does anybody want to say anything? You know, it's, the problem sometimes is, hey, keeping the comments to a minimum,
Yeah.
or hey, because sometimes we used to have hearing after hearing after hearing for land use applications. And then it just gets frustrating for everybody.
Yeah, I could see that.
That's no longer the case. I think they're pretty much, if you can get to a decision in a meeting or two, you try to do it. And if you're not close, hey, come back and change the application.
Mhm.
At least that's where it's been going. And I think that's worked pretty well.
Yeah.
Made things a
so.
little bit more direct and polite.
Let's see, so we're talking about the hearing, and I just wanted to make a comment when you get to the point in the hearing where you're ready to make a decision. So I'm just going to mention this, any decision that you make will be reviewed by the district court to determine whether or not there's competent evidence in the record to support your decision. And that's the standard. It's not like, does the judge like your decision or think it was a good land use decision for the town? Is there any competent evidence, which is a relatively low standard, right? Like if we're doing our jobs and I trained you correctly, we should always be able to find competent evidence in the record to support your decisions. So, and I just bring that up because if you are at the point where you're making a decision and you're trying to articulate it and you're trying to think about the record and the evidence you heard, and you can't quite put it together, to me, always that's a red flag that maybe there's not enough evidence in the record to support the decision that you want to make. And so then the question becomes why? And do we need more in the record? Is there something missing here? Do we need more evidence to consider? I know it's a little bit of a gray area, but I just bring it up because I want you to think about that as you make decisions, what the kind of the goal is and what the reviewing court's going to look at when they look at your decisions. The final thing I mentioned, I think it's kind of helpful to use a decision document to guide your decision-making, especially when you're making findings on the record. So that could be a draft ordinance, a resolution, findings from the staff, anything like that, because that's really going to have, I call it the magic words. And those are like the legal magic words that courts always look for when local governments make decisions in certain findings. And Jared and his staff do an excellent job of really laying those out. So that can be a way to guide your decision-making to make sure you're deciding everything you need to and you're hitting all the legal issues. And then if not, you can always say, direct staff to go back and change the ordinance or change whatever it is that you're considering.
Yeah.
But that's a time when you might be thinking, oh, maybe there isn't enough evidence in the record for me to make the link to this finding that I need to make.
I think some people feel that, oh, there's a draft findings of fact. You have to stay with that. You can say, hey, we want to add it, A, B, C, and D. The only problem is most boards, they're on a set schedule once a month or every other week. Sometimes if this board doesn't come back, you may have to call a special meeting in order to do a final yay or nay with the findings.
Yeah, and just kind of building on that, I think one thing that we can try to do, knowing that this board isn't going to be meeting every 2 weeks like other boards or once a month like other boards, is, if we're getting to the point of a motion and the board desires to change that slightly or holistically from what the staff recommendation is, we can talk about that. We can pause the meeting. I can draft it up, print up the changes and distribute it to everybody. And so I think there is that opportunity, if it's small changes, if it's big changes, I do think continuing the meeting, coming back in a month, talking about it one more time is probably the most prudent. But I have seen with the Planning and Zoning Commission where we're trying to maybe wordsmith one condition or one finding, and we're there, but if we just gave ourselves 5 minutes, type it up, everyone can read it, and then everyone can say, that sounds great, let's use this revised condition 6 or whatever that might be. So, trying to be respectful of the applicant's time, all of your times, and if we can get something done, let's work towards it, but don't be afraid to continue that item to a future hearing if need be.
That's all I have. Unless there's more questions.
Can I ask just a real quick question?
Yeah.
Just because this one's a little bit new for me, because this is unusual. As an alternate, we have all the regular members and, I'm appearing here as an alternate. Am I able to participate in the discussion as alternate? And then when the vote comes, would I be an abstain, or is the roll call silent with my name? They would only read the 5 names. So I'm just trying to figure out as an alternate and regular members what my role is.
Yeah, that's a good question. I was looking at the municipal code today on that issue. I could not find any clarity in the Carbondale municipal code on it. So I looked at some other local towns to see what their codes provide. And in every other code I looked at, alternate members are allowed to participate in the discussion and are expected to attend all the meetings. But when it gets to the time to vote, you're not a voting member if you're sitting as an alternate. So you wouldn't be called in the roll call. You wouldn't have to abstain. It's just that you're not a voting member as an alternate.
I think that's how we've done it. That's how we've done it in the past. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's been our tradition.
Yeah, I was surprised it wasn't in our code. Maybe I missed it, but
We even do abstentions? Do people
Um,
abstain?
Yes.
Yeah.
You can, I think we'd prefer a yes or no vote.
That's what I would figure.
I think there'd have to be a pretty extenuating circumstance to abstain from voting on the
Right,
Board of
which
Adjustments, but
yeah.
might mean you probably shouldn't have participated.
They're
Right, that's, I
right,
was just
yes,
thinking, like,
very
you
much
probably
so.
should have recused yourself.
Okay.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, well, I guess that's good.
That was a good question, because I'm an alternate, so. Thank you.
And then I have a question too. and,
Yeah.
Right now, a lot of the communities try to time their agendas so when something is coming up, but still sometimes things go quick and all of a sudden the applicant isn't here. And I always think you need to wait to start that agenda item if it's a public hearing
Mhm.
at the agreed upon time. I mean, you can start it later
Mhm.
because everybody should be there, but you can't start it a half hour earlier.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you're exactly right. That goes to the fundamental fairness and due process considerations and public notice.
we do say all times are approximate, but
Yeah.
duly noted.
No, but
I think we're starting
Yeah.
a minute early, that's a different thing than starting a half hour
Yeah,
early.
totally.
But if you have 5 people who come in, the public, and nobody knew they were gonna come and everything went quickly,
And it's done
meeting,
already.
the first part of the meeting,
Mhm.
that agenda item, and then they come in and, what do you
Yeah.
mean it started? What do you mean it's over?
Right. Yeah, I think you just avoid problems
Yeah.
later. And I mean, you could probably tell, I tend to think more process is good. And the more opportunity you can notice things and be very transparent about what you're doing, I think that just helps.
And you just have to tighten it up in the future.
Or just stop putting times on the agendas.
Yeah, right. That would help too. Just put a start time.
Or show up a half an hour early, because that may happen.
And then I think just kind of, other kind of overview training items is, Town of Carbondale follows Robert's Rules of Order. So if we ever have any questions, we try to refer back to that. We have used Bob's Rules of Order because it's like 800 pages shorter. And a little more local government oriented. So that's one resource if we do have process questions. And then, I think generally speaking, even what you see in the next agenda item from a staff memo kind of layout, You know, my approach is really to kind of provide that general background, some discussion. I tend to provide, especially for the Board of Adjustments, staff commentary for each of the variance findings, criteria, or the appeal criteria, so that you guys can kind of tie that evidence back to each one of those criteria. So sometimes the reports might get a little repetitive, but within those memos, I try to give you the documentation you might need to make a decision on each one of those review criteria. So hopefully that kind of gives you an overview on the staff memos that you'll see on any kind of presentation before you.
Yeah, sure.
When you have staff guidance memos, and you're inclined to vote against staff findings, does that open us up to legal action from an applicant if staff says, oh yeah, you should do it, and you say no, or vice versa? Is there enough
Never happens.
lenience in the rules? Or is that, should that all automatically give us a little, tingle of, I need to look at this further?
Well, I mean, to answer your question, you absolutely can decide how you want to decide. You're not bound by staff findings in any way. So if you don't agree, I mean, you can disagree. I think, and that kind of goes to your quasi judicial role where you have discretion to make these decisions. I think the key though is really, especially if you're going to agree with staff findings that are pretty detailed, making sure that you're really explaining very clearly why you disagree, and make a really clear record on that, because that's going to be the issue. I guess I don't know if more people would appeal it or not, but if they did, what I would want and what you would want is just a really clear record as to why you disagreed, and even try to link it to the code or whatever you're looking at, whatever evidence you're looking at, just really explain that for the record.
Try to avoid things like I like and I don't like.
Yes.
Yeah, and staff always and
And if I can kind of build on that, so one of our key roles is to make your decisions the most defensible decisions they can possibly be, even if they are contrary to what we recommend. And so one tactic that the Planning and Zoning Commission has done is saying, okay, well, we disagree with staff. Here's why in the deliberation. We're going to continue the public hearing, and staff, we want you to prepare a motion that captures our deliberation for a recommendation of denial. And so that is a great way of saying, let's give staff 2 weeks, prepare something, make sure it's a good motion, and then you can kind of nitpick around the edges if need be on that motion. But I would certainly recommend against just trying to craft a motion that completely is contrary to what's in your packet right at the meeting, if at all possible. That can be, they tend to be not the most defensible motions.
I don't see that as being an issue.
Well, I think a lot of times staff too will give alternate
Mhm.
recommendations. If you're choosing to deny this, blah, 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 so I think that happens. And I think as the Board of Adjustment, we're not P and Z. So we are kind of going again, things that have been, sometimes it's a case that staff made one recommendation and they're bringing it to us because they don't like staff's recommendations. So it can be contentious that way.
Yeah, with the Board of Adjustments, I think you'll tend to find both motions prepared for you. So you'll have the staff recommendation, whether that's approval or denial, but we'll also take the time to prepare the alternate, the contrary to recommendation. P and Z, that happens a little bit less, tends to be just one motion. And so that's where we're meeting regularly. Let's continue that public hearing and draft up that other motion if at all possible.
Gotcha. And there's the difference of P and Z still has a board above us where you guys don't. Is that
Correct.
kind of part of that
Correct.
thought process on decision making.
The district court, right? That's the board above us.
Yes. I don't usually come to Board of Adjustment or P and Z meetings, but I know at Board of Trustee meetings, when I feel like a trustee is trying to make one of those motions, just kind of in the air, I might say, hey, maybe do you want to direct staff to go back and write something up? And they don't always say yes, but they usually say, yeah, that's a good idea. And Jerry can do that too, if he feels like you're kind of spinning and trying to do a motion on the fly. He can jump in and say, hey, do you want me to go back and put this together for you?
Well, I think it's staff's role too. If there's a really contentious, potentially legal item before the Board of Adjustment, the attorney needs to, you're gonna bring the attorney.
Yes, certainly.
So that does
Certainly.
happen.
Yeah.
It has happened.
Yeah. Yeah, appeals. Yeah, more often I would think than variances.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And sometimes what is odd with the Board of Adjustment, when it's an appeal, it's almost someone on staff has to say no, and then it's written up, and then you think it maybe is more contentious. Sometimes it's just, hey, we can take you to the Board of Adjustment or whatever other board once we deny it and you say, hey, I don't like your decision. So
You'll find if the decision's going the applicant's way, they don't want to come back in 2 weeks. They want it done right then and there.
I just want to do a good job.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Feel free to reach out if you have any follow-up questions or want to chat about anything.
Are you staying tonight?
I mean, I can. I wasn't planning on it, but
I don't think it's, well, I shouldn't say.
you don't think it's
anything.
necessary? Okay.
You have no opinion.
I have no opinion. Jared?
No, I don't think it's necessary.
Okay.
You're,
Okay.
you're good.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Susan.
Yeah, it was nice to meet everyone.
Nice to see you in
It was
person.
good to see you.
Usually see you in Zoom meetings. So it's nice to see you in person. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody, for sharing with me.
Okay.
Thanks, Sharon.
Can we take a 2 or 3 minute recess? Because
Certainly,
Like,
I need to.
I know,
visit the
well, it
room.
doesn't lay flat.
certainly.
Just remember that the recording is on and will stay on.
Yep.
Okay, while you're taking a break.
And Jura, if you want to pop up here, you're next on the agenda and we can get going. Sit or stand? Yeah, sit if you want. Be comfortable at least.
No, that's okay.
Just always read the code. Yeah, just always read the code, that's all I can say right now. Always read it.
Support your case. Yeah, right. They might ask you questions of you. Then they'll just have some deliberation. And then to make sense. So just a quick overview, just so you know. But yeah, hopefully it's nothing too formal.
I'll see you at whenever our next meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you,
There's a bunch of hurricanes going on right now, apparently. Yeah.
Yeah. Code update. Before you leave. Yeah, but we'll see.
Oh, keep going.
around, right?
Yeah.
And I think those off, you guys. Those other ones that's highlighted. Hi, I'm the chairman. Your. Pardon? Your. Okay. Nice to meet you. Okay. Yeah, I just wasn't sure how to cover it there. Yeah. No. Yeah, we can wait. I think we're doing good on time. Electric readiness building and. That's the goal versus. I think we're ready to get going again.
Okay, 7:35. And this is a public hearing. Okay, Giora.
Before we get started, can I make a request? One is everybody, when you're speaking, turn your mic on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of times I can't hear what you're saying. And if you guys have a conversation between the two of you or the two of you, and you're just talking like this, please don't do that. Thanks.
Ready? Okay. All right, well, the Hans have made an application for a variance. The location is 581 North 8th Street, lot 21 of the Gianetti subdivision, parcel number 2393-342-25021. The zoning is residential low density, and it is for a variance from maximum impervious lot coverage. What we're going to have is staff will do a staff report, and then the planning commission can ask questions of the planning staff. Then if you want to make a presentation, you can make the presentation. Then the commission will go and ask you any questions that they may have. Then there will be a time for public comment. And after the public comment, then the planning commission will talk about the matter and try to move towards a final decision. Russ?
Just for the record, this is the Board of Adjustments, not the Planning Commission.
Oh, sorry, Board of Adjustment. Okay,
Find and replace.
thank you. And first of all, are there any conflicts of interest or anything else anybody wants to disclose?
Just for the record, I don't know if this is, I'd rather just disclose it. I did work for the town of Carbondale during this time period, but I do not recall working on this project. Just wanted to get that on the record.
Okay, thanks. And I need to make a disclosure, because I worked for the town of Carbondale at the beginning of this in the 2002 timeframe. And I also was involved as the planner for reviewing the subdivision itself. Back at that time, Jared, Well, staffing with the town always sort of goes up and down, and in the late nineties, building staff had more staff than planning until Jana came on board in 2001. So the building department actually made the zoning compliance reports. Then if they had questions or if something was tough or needed interpretation, then I, as a planning director, would be involved. So I was not involved with the review of this either, and I'm not sure how it happened because, you know, I knew the builders, Dwayne Stewart and Watkins. And usually if there was any question, they would bring it forward. It looks like there was some types of questions. I was not here in some of the future permit reviews, 2006 and 2010. And for further disclosure, you know, this eventually was the house of my dentist, you know, for years. And his son lived there at that house, and now his son also rents from me at my house. So this is an example of what can happen in a small town. And I think I can make a clear decision on this. I don't think I'm biased. Russ?
As a matter of disclosure, I was on the Board of Trustees in 2002, and I don't think that this came to our attention at all.
No. No, I don't believe it did. I don't think it came until I was talking to you a few weeks ago.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I don't think there's any conflicts with any of that, in my
No, I
opinion.
don't think so
But
either.
I appreciate you guys disclosing all of that.
Okay. Well, anyway, so Jared, first of all, the public hearing notices were, they were duly made.
Yep, so so the application before you tonight was noticed in the Soper Sun on September 5th. And the applicant completed the mailed and posted notice on September 6th, all in compliance with the noticing requirements.
Okay.
We have not received any public comment written to us either before the packet went out or since the packet went out. And then just kind of a brief summary of the application. You know, as we include in the staff memo before you tonight's an application for a variance from the maximum impervious lot coverage to permit the construction of 132 square foot living room expansion. Because that expansion and the existing structure and site improvements exceed the maximum impervious lot coverage of 25% in the residential low density zone district. So the staff memo kind of overviews where this is. You know, it's to the rear of the property, and currently the area has a at-grade patio, which is impervious. It's a concrete patio and a large roof overhang. Regardless, our UDC considers this site a non-conforming site and requires a variance to be approved for any external expansions to the structure. So the applicant has submitted a variance application. And in the memo, I kind of provided an overview of how the property's lot coverage is calculated and broke it out into the various categories the town uses to calculate lot coverage. And have also included a brief history of all those past permit activities on this lot. There was 4 permits that we had of record: the initial construction, a permit to finish the basement and build a external or a secondary structure, and then a permit to cover some stairs, and then a permit to cover this rear patio, which is the area in question. In that summary, when we looked through it, you know, we don't have any plan sets. So it's kind of a little bit of reading some of the inspections, reading the zoning checklists that were provided and trying to interpolate. And so I don't want anything in my memo to insinuate that there was anything done incorrectly in the past by staff, but just kind of clearly state that what it looked like was a permit was submitted. And the permit showed that the original construction was in compliance with the impervious lot coverage at either 19 or 22% at the time. As it was built, some things tend to change. Some things could have changed on this property. And ultimately what was provided with the ILC at the completion of the property and improvement location certificate, and what was CO'd was a building that it largely resembles what's there today. Site improvements that largely resemble what's there today, which exceed the impervious lot coverage. What's there today has a lot coverage of 32.5%, which is about 2,200 square feet over the maximum impervious lot coverage. And so the applicant really has a couple options. One option is to remove lot coverage, whether that's driveway, structures, whatever that might be, to bring the property into compliance. Or another option is to convert portions of their driveway into pervious pavers. The town's lot coverage requirements allow for 10% of the pervious area required to be provided as pervious pavers and be exempt from impervious lot coverage. So for this lot, that's 75% of the lot area, and then 10% of that could be provided as pervious pavers. Therefore, the applicant could provide about 10 square feet more of pervious pavers than is required to meet, or than is required to get into compliance with impervious lot coverage. So that's option 2. And then option 3, which is the option the applicant's chosen, is to pursue a variance request. As you can see in the staff memo, we provided a response to each one of the variance review criteria. I want to make sure it's noted that variances are a little different than other land use actions. For the Board of Adjustments to find or to approve a variance, the Board of Adjustments has to find compliance with every one of the review criteria. So that's why I kind of went through each and every one, provided a response. In summary, I think staff can find support for the variance due to some of the exceptional circumstances where the town reviewed, approved, and CO'd a building that exceeded lot coverage. In addition, it's the need for the variance is not of the applicant's own doing, and I think the Board of Adjustments could find that the requirement to convert or remove 2,100 square feet of impervious lot coverage could be viewed as a hardship on the current property owner. So we have prepared a recommendation for approval of the variance, and we included findings of fact and a grant of variance draft as attachment E to the staff memo. Alternatively, the Board of Adjustments could choose to deny the application, and we also included in the staff memo a draft denial motion if that's the route the Board of Adjustments would like to pursue. One thing I would like to add to the draft findings of fact is variance approvals can include conditions. And so we took a quick stab at proposing some conditions that the Board of Adjustments could consider. That's captured in that first bold section in the findings of fact. I'd highly recommend that the Board of Adjustments, if you are willing to support a variance, kind of discuss those, see if those are appropriate or if other additional or replacement conditions are appropriate. And I would recommend a conversation on that prior to a motion. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you all might have. Otherwise, we can turn it over to the applicant.
Thanks for the reminder, Russ. The question is about the intent of impervious surface. And I know in the past, there's been open space and impervious were kind of mixed. And is the intent of this impervious section regarding drainage solely, or is there more to it than that?
I think there's more to it. I think it's partly drainage. It's also partly kind of expectations of how a property will be developed with kind of intensity of development. whether that's structures or at grade surface improvements, to not only provide an expectation to the current and future property owners, but also to adjacent property owners and the public at large. And so I think impervious lot coverage is one of those tools in zoning, along with height and setbacks, that kind of says, look, you can expect this type of development on this site of this type of intensity. And so that's another factor or another kind of rationale for impervious lot coverage.
Okay, thank you.
I have another question.
Mhm.
All right, I gotta give you a little preamble. I'm admittedly, a little new to the town of Carbondale land use code. So obviously defer to you on these things, but I was reading through it and it seemed to me the dimensional standard we're dealing with is a flat 25% maximum impervious lot coverage.
Mhm.
These breakdowns about principal building, accessory building, those things, I didn't find those to be a standard, right? So it doesn't matter how you do it as long as 25%. Am I reading? I didn't find those breakdowns anywhere in the code.
Yeah, generally speaking, yes, I do think there is a different level or a different type of improvement. I think it's easier to add and remove at grade surface level improvements like patios, driveways, things like that, change those over time, as opposed to portions of principal structures, habitable space. That's a little more permanent in its impervious lot coverage. And so with this application, one of the considerations I made was the modification of a outdoor patio space to a habitable space constitutes kind of a different level of impervious lot coverage. And that kind of helped lead to that external expansion requirement, which required the variance. So technically, yes, I don't think there is a breakdown that says within that 25%, you only can have X percent different, but I do think functionally, there's a different kind of level of permanency, if you will, to structures versus driveways, or a little different level of intensity in impervious lot
I guess what I was
coverage.
getting at is if it was a vacant lot and somebody came in to pull a permit to build a house, they could use their 25% any way they see fit.
They could use their 25% just on structure and have no other
Right.
improvements,
they could
correct?
Pave over 25% of the lot and say, I'm done.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yes, certainly.
All right, that was my question.
Sorry about that.
Anybody else with questions for staff?
No.
Mr. Hahn?
Hi, my name is Giora Hahn. First, I'd like to thank you guys for staffing this Board of Adjusters. I know as a Carbondale citizen, we appreciate it. Having one since we haven't had one for, I think it's been a couple years.
5 or so.
5 years. As you have been explained, what we're basically trying to do is just move a living room wall 6 feet into a already covered and paved deck. My understanding is that we're not affecting the nonconformity, which in this case was historically approved by the town. So we're not adding to the impervious surface area of the lot, which is non-conforming. We accept that. And as I delineated in my requests, it's really a very simple and small remodel, and obviously will not cause hardship to anyone to pull up and bring the lot to conformity as it regards in regards to the impervious surface area would be a extreme expense that we can't assume financially. And so, I mean, that's really kind of the long and short of it. I hope that I can be of service in answering any questions. And I appreciate you guys looking at this variance.
It's actually more for staff. Has the Public Works Director or Town Engineer reviewed this?
Yeah, and they had no comments on it.
So they're fine with it? Does that mean? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Just a quick question. I drove by it and, it's amazing when you drive by these things and not see them for years, and then you really look, I noticed there was so much parking, and, it was before I got the information hidden. So I went to the county assessor office, or not the office, the website, and is there one unit on that property or two?
There's one unit.
There's one dwelling unit?
Yeah.
Okay, already, because the tax records show there were two.
No, there's an ADU that is a part of it, if that's what, I'm sorry. There's an ADU that's part of the, I guess, reconstructed basement. And maybe that's what's listed as a secondary dwelling. I don't.
So there's a ADU in the basement?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was permitted and made legal?
As far as I know, we purchased the house. We hadn't done any changes to it 2 or 3 years ago. And so I hope so.
I'm not aware of it being permitted. I mean, there's banded ADUs in a lot of places in town, and that's actually a separate discussion, I think, because theoretically they could come in with an after the fact building permit and try to make that legal. There are size requirements. I haven't looked at them in a while. But something for the applicant, if you're using it as one unit and it's going to stay one unit, you may get a little bit of property tax relief by proving that it's one unit. Now they may say, get rid of X or get rid of this, but that is an option, because I thought there was an ADU there for years, just because I know the son of Brad Nicholson. And when I went to the website, it's still listed that way. So I don't know if it was used or not, but that doesn't really affect the lot coverage, and that is a separate issue. Do you need to comment on that at all?
I mean, when I looked through the building permit records, the only item I could see regarding the basement is a basement finish that had no details about whether there was a bathroom, a sink, a stove, an external staircase, anything in there. And then, so I can't comment whether it's a legal or illegal ADU. We just don't have any records to reflect that. But I would agree. I think it is a separate issue, because what we're talking about is a lot coverage, and I don't think the two are related necessarily.
Not real relevant, I guess. Not real relevant, I guess, and to tonight's.
Yeah, I mean, it can be a separate issue and it doesn't affect it the way it's set up. Any other comments to address to the applicant? Okay, with that, it's, okay, Jeff?
Is there have you considered any do you have stormwater issues on the site? Have you considered any mitigation to that? Because
As in like,
I mean, we currently have a well-functioning drain system.
a dry well?
I don't know what that is. So excuse my ignorance. All we have are gutters, and the gutters drain into, as far as I know, a drainage system.
Yeah, out into the grass.
Well, no, there's drainage also not into the grass, but there's like drainage. They're like these drainage things that are in the backyard that are underneath the gutters.
Yeah, so you probably have a few small dry wells back there. So yes.
If that was what a dry well is, then yes, that's what we have. I have.
They're buried, you don't see the dry wells.
Yeah, I have no idea.
And sometimes there's concrete in the lid like a, sewer manhole, and sometimes they're more primitive, but
Yeah.
okay.
Are we into comments or what are we?
So now we're gonna go to the
Oh, public.
public hearing. So it's, I have 7:58. And we're gonna open up the public comment portion of the meeting. Is there anyone?
Online, Kay.
Is there anyone online? I see E. Peterson.
So Ellie is also one of our planners here. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she is a staff member listening in.
And there's no hands written, raised from the ether world. Okay, so it's 7:59. And the public comment portion, at least for now, is over. So now it's time for the planning commission to deliberate and talk about the application.
The Board of
So,
Adjustment.
Or the Board of
Board of
Adjustment.
Adjustment.
Board of Adjustment, excuse me. When I
First
say
meeting.
planning commission, this is Zoom Board of Adjustment. I apologized. Okay, so the Board of Adjustment can now deliberate. So who wants to start?
I could start, if that's all right.
You bet.
All right. All right. So, I read through the packet and thank you. Really well informed and helped a lot. And also thank the applicant. The pictures and the plans were all very helpful, particularly the photographs. Since it's in the back of the property and you can't see it from the road. So I don't know. I looked at this over. It seems to me everything that's been built out there was done with permits and legally established. So I look at it as we have a legal nonconformity. My reading of the code, frankly, was you're not proposing to expand or enlarge the nonconformity at all. So really, I was thinking you don't even need a variance. I don't understand what we're varying because you're staying within the established legal nonconformity without expanding or enlarging it. So, personally, I don't think you even needed to apply for this and should have been just okay. But given that we're here, I agree with everything Jared's written up in the responses to the standards and don't see any harm in granting the variance. In fact, I think it should be granted if we're doing one at all. And also, I didn't think we need any conditions of approval other than if we're gonna press it, write something that we do establish that the nonconformity is at 32.5% and that's the limit. I think if that's done, all the other suggested conditions are already implicit and covered in that.
Okay.
That's my take after reviewing it and looking at the code to understand a little about the rules about nonconformities.
Simplifying the conditions is what you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we need any condition other than the limit of 32.5% won't be exceeded or expanded without another variance or something. But
Russ?
Well, I agree with a lot of what you say, except for the fact that the one condition I think we should continue with or make on our approval if we do, is that if this gets destroyed for some reason, that the new building, the new structure must meet the 25%.
yeah, I agree with that. I thought that was kind of just what the code would say anyway.
Well, so I don't think it's really a legal nonconformity. I think it's a nonconformity that's been approved.
Well, that is what a legally established nonconformity is. It's legally
Well,
established.
that'd be for the lawyers to figure out.
Yeah, I mean,
you
this
know,
is what I did.
But I agree with everything else you've said. And I don't have a problem with it.
Okay.
If
That-
the applicant is willing to accept those conditions.
Is that, Jared, is that if you tear down the structure and start over, does the code allow you to keep a nonconformity or you then have to comply?
Correct. How we wrote this is if it's destroyed or torn down by more than 50%, it would have to comply with whatever the lot coverage requirements are at the time. I just wanted to make sure that if we were providing a variance, that we were explicit with that and, included that condition, that reference back to that code section.
And that's the code the code limits 50% demolition?
50% is the town's threshold for demolition versus rebuilding.
Yeah, no harm in reiterating a code
Yeah,
standard.
that is 7.4.3, I believe.
Correct.
And then someone would also have the option to come in, if there's a fire there, they have the option, well,
Right.
I want the variance to come up to what I had before and I want to build exactly what it was or a little bit less, but more than 25%. So they do have that option. At least
Right.
that's
Normal.
I've seen that happen often, and I think I forget if this code says you need a variance if you want to reestablish the nonconformity, because I deal with too many codes now. I forget which community is outlined.
Yeah, and how this variance is written up, that they would have to do that if they want to reestablish that nonconformity.
Okay.
If you include that condition that Russ was talking about wanting to keep.
Mike?
I liked what Mitch had to say. And I agree with that, as long as we don't exceed 32.5 square feet or percent of the square footage. I'm in favor of it. That's all I have to say.
Janet?
I think I'm gonna have to respectfully disagree. I don't know that the applicants made the argument, thank you, Russ, and has met the criteria. I think that the first variance criteria specifically says the subject property has an exceptional shape, topography, building configuration, or other exceptional site condition. Mistakes happen with building permits. And, I think the property owners in the past years have benefited from being able to exceed that 25%. And I think that building walls increases the intensity of the building on that site. And I also have a hard time, with the rationale that it'll cost money. I don't think that the cost should really factor into a variance. And I think, in fact, in the variance section, it says that that shouldn't be included. And also, there's a lot of loss. A lot of people want this or something to make something comfortable. And I think it's going down a slippery slope, not to tie it to a very specific site condition. And I think a mistake on a building permit doesn't rise to that. So, thank you.
I would just say, I don't know that a mistake was made. All I know is permits were issued and COs were issued. Multiple permits and multiple certificates of occupancy were issued. And I don't blame a property owner for that. So the ability to maintain a nonconformity is in the code, even without a variance. So I'm certainly not going to punish somebody for going through a process that I don't think they needed to go through.
Well, my question about what is impervious, why do we define it that way, kind of gets on the issue that Janet mentioned about, the intensity. It has a potential to increase the intensity on the property rather than just the imperviousness. It does say impervious, so that is the word. So that's what they're not increasing at all. I also feel that the way they've enclosed that area is not expanding outside the building envelope. It's really just filling in a corner, right?
Yeah, that's what I saw in the code. It's already got a roof on it.
It's already got a roof, but I
concrete
meant,
patio.
even though they're not filling in that whole patio,
No,
they're just
no.
filling in a corner of the building, which seems very minimal to me.
Yeah, I thought it was a reasonable expansion, and I do see it as a hardship to tell somebody you now gotta lose some improvements you built legally because you wanna do something that's within the parameters of the code.
Okay, well, I'll weigh in a little bit. I think a variance is needed because it is like Jeff, it is increasing the intensity of the use as opposed to just the patio. You know, it's a building and there could be more people, there's more visual impacts, et cetera. The town did have a hand in this somehow. And I don't know if you should be penalized. I don't think they could go and say, hey, take out this part of the driveway in that room. I don't think they can do that. With the conditions, I guess if we're going to go in that direction, we should talk, but I don't mind it having specified, hey, here's this plan right now with X square feet in building and X square feet in the garage, et cetera. But I like flexibility in the future because someone else could come in and, I mean, Jay Leno could buy it and say, I want a much bigger garage and I want a smaller house. So however they reconfigure it, as long as they meet the, at least at this point, that 32.5%, unless it's demolished for some, reason or by fire, in which case you got to go back to 25. And I don't know if you can wordsmith this stuff tonight, if we get to that point or not, Jared.
I think we can.
Okay.
I'm with you on that. Generally, I mean, I'm not trying to argue. I'm just trying to explain where I come from is, I've been a planner a long time, so I know, my way of working with codes is I don't look at the intent when the letter of the code's clear.
Okay.
Right? I only go to underlying, unless you wrote in the code, the intent is that's different. But to me, the code is 25%. I don't care how you use it. I don't care if you're expanding this impervious, but losing that impervious, it's 25%. So I don't go to intent when the letter's clear. And to me, the letter's clear, it's 25%. You have 32.5. It was legally established at 32.5. You're not expanding it or enlarging it. You should be allowed to do that. And going forward, I don't want to write into conditions something that's beyond what the code says either. So that's why I'm content with 32.5 is the limit. If you tear down more than 50%, like the code says, you're back to 25%. But I don't need to break it down into, you can use your 25% with this percent being the house and that percent being your driveway. That's not in the code. Even if it may be in the intent, until somebody writes that into the code as the intent, it's 25%.
Just to be clear, it nowhere in the code mentions anything about a different level of intensity for some of these, the enclosed areas or not. It doesn't say anything about that. Okay, thank you.
Intensity used to be in there in the non-conforming structure part, but I don't know if that comes up with this either. Do you remember that?
No, that's what I mentioned before. There was something about, it's open space and
Right, and yeah.
imperviousness. But it sounds like, it clearly just says pervious. That's what they're asking for the variance for. It's not the intent. It doesn't say intent anywhere.
Mark.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I wonder, it's an interesting point you guys have brought up about the intensity. And I think that's a real judgment call. And I don't feel that's in our purview to do that on this between intensity and impervious. That to me would be the real slippery slope. So I kind of wonder where you guys are heading with this idea of intensity.
I'm not heading anywhere. I just wanted to flesh that out with Jared, and I think Janet's point too, and, you know, I think anything that increases the livability of a structure in the downtown area that they're not having to tear it down, I think is a benefit to the town and the people of the town, so I don't see it as an issue. But I just I'm trying to think of things that, you know, that may be relevant, and if it's not, it's not. I think what's more relevant is that the engineer doesn't have any issues with this. I think that's who really looks at water. This is about drainage and runoff, right? Sounds like there are dry wells. That was a good answer to me. And the engineer's saying there's not a problem. They've never seen flooding on the streets. We're not increasing the impervious area, so I'm like, seems okay to me.
You know, we haven't heard from any neighbors who have had flooding issues or concerns with this at all, so.
And I'm not going anywhere with intensity. I was just, bringing it up for the discussion. And I know if I was sitting in that seat over there, I probably would have come to the same conclusion. We need some kind of blessing by somebody because there's extra surfaces and living area out there than normally would happen. So I would have done something like this. And it may have been an appeal as opposed to a variance, but who knows, would have come there. Probably the same thing. Okay.
Make a motion, I guess. Is it time for that?
Well, let's
Is
see.
that right?
Any other comments?
Yeah, we
Okay, anybody
discussed the
want to
motion,
craft
yeah.
a motion?
We got one more.
Okay,
Things. One, I appreciate all the work that staff did.
Mhm.
I thought the memo was very informative. And I appreciate the owner coming in and talking to us. I want to be careful that, because we've brought up things here tonight that are not in our purview as far as I can tell. And I appreciate staff's comments about limiting the footprint of the structures as well as falling back to the 32.5% on this property. And I don't think, I think about the world we live in, and if a fire took out somebody's home, are we gonna make them fall to current zoning, or are we gonna allow them to rebuild what they were living in? And it's been brought up here tonight, and I don't think this is the place for that conversation. I am 100% in alignment with approving this as per staff comments. And I think we need to be careful about going any further than that. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, to me, it's approve the variance, leave it at the 32.5% being the maximum today. And if something goes wrong and the house burns down or gets destroyed by some unwillful act, then let the code cover what the
Yeah.
code says it does.
you
at
go
that
with the
time.
code says, because a
At that
lot of
time.
them do say,
Yeah, we don't need to set something that the
if there's a
code.
non-conforming,
like
then,
with-
you need it, and you want to reestablish, there is a variance.
Right.
And that's what it used to say here. I don't know if it does anymore, because I didn't look at the non-conforming section. But anyway, with that, unless something else, somebody has something else, I think it's time for someone to try to craft a motion. So
Well, I would move to approve the requested variance with the stated limit that we're granting a variance to allow 32.5% impervious site coverage.
I would second that.
So,
I have a question on that. Now,
okay,
the way I hear it, and I'm not sure if this is what you mean,
Okay.
is that we're gonna allow them to put this 32 square feet under his living room, which I think is a great idea. But that we're also saying that his 32.5% impervious surface area stays forever.
Yeah, unless another variance request comes in, but yeah. I mean, it's sites, but it's specific to the proposal.
Right.
You know, if you come in with, never mind, we want to build a accessory building in the yard that covers square footage, that might be
So
different, but
just a question would be like, say, they decide to tear the garage down and tear up some of the driveway. We've got a huge driveway. And build a larger structure by tearing up some of the asphalt and still maintain the 32.5%.
yeah, as long as they don't exceed the 50% demolition limit. Yep,
Yeah, see, that's,
that's standard practice to me, is you're not expanding or enlarging it. You can work with that limit so long
well, the
as
limit,
once you demolish 50%, then you're considering then it's considered to be starting over, and you gotta conform like anyone else who's starting from
okay, I
scratch.
want to make sure that that happens. I mean.
Yeah, that's already in the code, so that's.
Yeah,
why-
I don't, see, what I'm trying to,
And I don't want to write that into a decision, because what if the code changes and our decision's now counter to what the code changed to, you know? So
yeah, what would get precedence then? Would, you know,
Well,
so I just want to make sure that they can't just, I'm not saying they're gonna do this, but they can't tear up 30% of their driveway and then build on that spot, because it would still be impervious.
to me, is if it complies with all
They
other
could.
dimensional standards, sure.
Yeah, if I can jump in, the motion Mitch is recommending could do exactly that. All he is saying is, in his motion is, the new maximum impervious lot coverage is defined by the code is 32.5%, and however you use that 32.5% is at your discretion, property owner. So
Well,
that
that's
could
not the
be,
code. That would just be our variance, wouldn't it? The code's 25.
I mean, I think
It
the
will be
code
for this
is that. in
particular
the-
lot.
I think the code is that in the case of an existing legally established nonconformity, because if that's the existing legally established is 32.5, you can do whatever you want as long as you're not expanding or enlarging that nonconformity. You're not making it 32.6%.
I understand that.
That's how I would read a code. I mean, that's, yeah.
but if you tear it down, you can build, like you could cover the driveway with another building without asking for another variance.
As long as you don't cross that demolition threshold, the code says of 50%. If you demolish 50.1%, then no, you're back to 25.
So you could demolish, but I'm just saying you could add another building, expand the garage to twice the size.
Yeah,
On
take
the-
away,
on the
take
gr-
away
on the
some of
driveway.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you could do it twice the size. Well, I suppose. you
Well, I
could.
think,
Yeah,
why
you could do
not?
it.
What's there's
You can
nothing,
take something
There's
else.
floor area limits, the height limits, the setbacks, so
Yeah,
all of
those things all, right.
figure into it as
Yeah.
well. But yeah,
I just wanted to see, flexibility in the future, not say it's this many square feet for the principal structure and this many square feet for something else, because if anything I've learned here, someone just comes in and tears up a brand new 7,500 square foot house because they want to do something else, so they don't like the decks.
yeah. I mean,
And who
I
knows what's
default
going to
back
happen here in
whatever
the
code
future.
says you
Yeah, I
have to
mean,
do in that case.
I mean, this is, so 30 years from now, 50 years from now, who knows what's going to be happening.
Right, and that's why I don't want to write all this stuff in, because the code will define it at the time.
Understood. So we have a motion on the floor. I'm not sure exactly how to word it.
so I've got a suggestion.
Do you want to take a stab? Okay.
So starting with the staff recommendation, I think what I heard is strike condition number 1, strike condition number 2.
Where are these conditions?
the last
The
page.
last-
They're on the
The
last
last
page
2
of the
pages of the
entire
packet.
It's
Oh,
a
okay.
findings of fact and grant of variance. Page 122 of 122.
Can I ask in the future that those kind of things be exhibit
And as a matter of
A?
fact,
The
if
You
first
got it.
one right
You
after
got
the
it.
memo?
I
Okay.
thought about that after I put the packet together.
So would you want to start and
So
go through? So
yeah, so I was just
striking
waiting for
one.
everyone to get there. So my recommendation would be strike number 1, strike number 2, change number 3 to state the grant of a variance allows the property to have a maximum impervious lot coverage of 32.5% of the lot area. And then strike 4 and strike 5 is, I believe, what I heard Mitch's recommended motion be. And to not reference the UDC's nonconformity section, just allow that to be whatever that is. So it'd just be one condition.
That works for me.
Clearly
yeah.
states the new lot coverage is 32.5%.
Me, I try not to go overly into things on these.
Do we need something which says that? And if they change it, as long as all other aspects of the code, I guess that's really implied and that should be part of the review.
Yet, I mean, to me, the grant of the variance to allow the property to have a maximum impervious lot coverage of 32.5% would allow that to continue. And the only thing that would change it is if the entire structure is, I guess, I think the one risk you have is the grant of the variance creates a legal new lot coverage. And so that 50% demolition would no longer apply because that condition would basically say this lot has 32.5% lot coverage forever.
No, that's not my intent. My intent.
Yeah,
is
so I just put that together.
Yeah, the non-conforming
Yeah, I think 5
section
needs to
continues
stay.
to apply, and the demolition rules continue to apply.
So the grant of the variance is limited to the existing structures and site improvement at the time of the grant variance, which has a maximum impervious lot coverage of 32.5%. And just leave it there.
And the proposed plans, of course, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's okay. I mean, I'd keep 1 through 5 personally. But that's, your motion is on the table, so.
And does something need to be said? Your rationale mentions 32.5%, and then if you get into the big demolition, it gets back to 25%, or just because that is that?
Yeah, I mean, or maybe we could just
Otherwise-
leave condition 1, like you said, and then put in a one that says, the code provisions on regulating of non-conforming structures continue to apply.
But I think if your intent is, they wanted to redo everything, knock everything down and start over, you live with the 25%, because that's what the
Right.
underlying is.
Right.
That zone district, okay. I think that needs to be in there.
The zoned limit as may be amended from time to time, something
Yeah,
like that.
it may change.
Right.
Current underlying zoning at the time of improvements.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not trying to just give you a free carte blanche.
sounded like that. for a
32.5
minute.
forever. You flushed it out. That's good. Thank you.
You want to check with the applicant to see if they're okay with this direction and?
Good idea. Okay, can you understand all this? Because a lot of us have lived it for years and we're aware of what we need, but you may not. So do you have questions?
I understand
Concerns?
that, I don't have any concerns. I think the only concern that I have is what Jack came up with, which is like if we do get completely knocked down by some act of God, then all of a sudden, but that's just not going to happen. And so I don't want to make anything, and that's what scares me. Like the house gets knocked down, are we now needing to tear up driveways in order to rebuild the house? That is the only thing that kind of caught my ear. I don't know if there's a way to separate a demolition of 50% or a remodel of 50% or more, having to bring it up to code versus natural disaster. But I'm gonna go with your say so.
Did you find that section of code? Was there something in there about?
Yeah,
Destroyed by
I'm not,
non-conforming structure, destroyed by an act.
Is there willful and non-willful
I'm not
demolition
seeing
or
anything. It
No?
just says if it's destroyed, if it's damaged or destroyed by any means,
Okay. Well, why don't
it's
we,
brought into compliance. So I think if you guys would like to differ from that, I would recommend kind of recrafting that condition 5 to include a act of God is,
There's a precedent on the Front Range when those fires actually burned down those homes. They had to change the rebuilding code to make it not too costly. So I don't know if that's relevant, but
I
it
think
was,
the town would be relatively reasonable if an act of God came through and destroyed this or a series of
I'd go with
towns,
let's
but
cross
that's,
that bridge if we ever come to it and just stick with
Yeah.
what these plans are, approved.
And I would accept that.
it's page 306, 305, and 306 of the UDC if you're scrolling through at home.
And while we're here, does anybody want to second this motion?
it's been seconded.
It's been seconded.
Mike did.
Well, I have another comment then after, since we've got those two done. I think we're opening ourselves up to, not only can he build, is the way I'm understanding this, 132 square feet, but he could go ahead and take up and build every square foot of asphalt into a house. He could do that. If you,
Setbacks.
well, even with setbacks, he could build
Area
a
limits.
whole big, huge house.
How about this? Do you guys ever attach the plans to the resolutions?
So
So we can approve
So
those plans?
condition number 2 is the building plan consistent with the design. And so it would allow
Beautiful.
just this 132 square foot addition, but it would require anything else. Let's say in Russ's situation, they want to rip up 500 square feet of driveway and convert that into a home. How this is written is that would not be covered by this variance, and that would require an additional variance.
Okay, I agree
Well,
with
you're
that.
gonna have he has the in this case, a 32.5%. All you have to do is apply for a building permit.
In Mitch's variance, yes. In the one I drafted, no, he would have to come back for a variance because it's only limited to the existing structure, the existing improvements, and what is being proposed with his 132 square foot addition.
And I can go for that.
So those are
Yeah.
some of the differences between the two
All right,
routes. So I think it's really, do you guys want to allow 32% and he can manipulate his structure and site as he wants within that, or to limit it to the application before you, the 132 square
And that's
feet?
condition,
Yeah, let me amend my motion.
condition 3 is exactly that.
Before you do that, let me read this section of the code. It's a bit
Okay.
different than it used to be, but this is damage or destruction, 7.4.3, capital letter B, where a non-conforming building, and you could apply all those improvements on the lot, is damaged by 50% or less of its replacement cost at the time of damage. It may be repaired or restored, provided any such repair or restoration is started within 180 days and is completed within 18 months from the date of partial destruction. So that's what we have in terms of the code.
It's financial, not square footage. That's the difference.
Correct. It's cost of replacement.
I think I can still go ahead and propose an amendment to the motion.
Okay.
I think it's totally reasonable to do the variance specific to these plans and this proposal and not just open up, the forever. So, and that's normally the way I have seen variances done. So I would recommend, move to remove. Is that right? Move to amend my motion to say, I move to approve the variance with conditions 1, with all but condition 4 as written. So that,
All but 4, did you say?
yeah, I would strike 4 because I think that gets a little too specific. So I'd like to just say, these plans are approved. If these plans mean 32.5 is staying the limit. And that it's subject to, the existing structures improvements are also fine with the limit. So it's really just changing the motion to as Jared has it written, but I would strike 5, what did I say, number 4? Because again, that's just the 2 structures, and if you add a square feet here and take them off there.
Grants a maximum structure footprint of 3,177 square feet for the principal structure and 914 square feet for the accessory structure, which is a detached garage. So that's what he's striking out. So
What are the other 3 conditions? I'm sorry,
That
I
stay.
didn't read them.
So the first one I would say is relief from the maximum impervious lot coverage to allow for a 132 square foot building expansion and for the existing structures and site improvements to have a maximum impervious lot coverage of 32.5%. The second one is the building plan. A building plan consistent with the design represented in the building permit application set from KA Design Works dated April 2nd, 2024, and not exceeding 132 square feet in area. Third one is variance is limited to the existing structures and site improvements at the time of the grant of the variance, which have a maximum impervious site coverage of 32.5% of the lot. And I assume that means as will be the plans, the existing improvements plus what's in those permits set. And the fifth one, which we would be keeping, would become number 4, is at the time the property is rezoned or the existing structures, principal and accessory structure, are damaged or demolished pursuant to the Unified Development Code, section 7.4.3, then property and site improvement shall be brought into compliance with all zoning standards, including but not limited to maximum impervious lot coverage. I would just say all applicable standards, but yeah. And so all we've struck from it, the one that's not there, is the variance grants a maximum structure footprint size of 3,177 square feet for the principal structure and 914 square feet for the accessory structure, in parentheses, detached garage.
You had a
Well,
question, Jeff?
Yeah, the word, in that first sentence, Jared, at the time the property is rezoned. So if it gets rezoned, they've got to tear stuff out.
Should the property be rezoned?
Yeah, that doesn't, I'm not comfortable with that. I'm
Right.
not sure what the intent is there. Because rezoning happens, I think.
I think the intent was, let's say the town has a new zone district residential duplex. And residential duplex permits 25% lot coverage. Part of the trade-offs or the consideration is rezoning to that new zone district would have to then comply with that versus bringing the variance with that and say, now the property can be rezoned residential duplex and get 32.5%
So it's,
lot
you're
coverage. And
getting,
so,
you're getting a benefit.
so
The
part
owner's
of it
getting a
is,
benefit.
if you're choosing to rezone, there could be a benefit associated with that, and you would have to weigh that against the cost of
Okay.
potential modifications. I threw this in there as discussion points.
Mhm.
You guys can choose to strike that and just say, leave it to the existing structures are damaged or demolished and remove the rezoning.
I would probably remove the part for rezoning,
Okay.
but, and that's because a lot of times the town is changing the zone district or the density or something else. So, I just keep out of it. If you're going to, if you're
Sounds good.
rezoning that whole area, the subdivision, that would be, there'd be a lot of discussion on that. So I'd take it out and simplify it.
Yeah, I would change 5 to just if the existing structures are damaged or demolished pursuant to Unified Development Code, ...
I agree.
I really think you're opening up to the fact that he could build a 9,000 square foot footprint on that property or close to that and could go up to 3 stories.
The variance is limited to the existing structures and
Not
site.
not if you strike
Plans.
4.
We're striking, well, striking 3.
Well, it is if we.
3
strike
is the
4,
one that limits.
It's still, the variance is for these plans represented in the KA Design Works dated 4/2/2024.
Yeah, so that
It's not
condition,
for anything different than that.
You know, I'd really like to get a really serious opinion on this. Legally speaking, that why, in my opinion, and it would be that if we grant this 32.5%, no matter what, that, and they could build on that with just getting a permit, a building permit.
All right, maybe this would help.
Okay.
Maybe this would solve it, right? Maybe we just strike all of these conditions and go with one condition that says the board grants a 7.25% variance to allow a 32.5% site coverage for the building plans consistent with the design represented in the building permit application plan set from KA Design Works dated blah, 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 not exceeding 132 square feet.
That makes
Period.
sense.
And then the rest of it can go away and the code covers us.
No, I would like that, but I'm kind of, the other part.
That way we've only granted a variance
Yeah.
for these plans and nothing else.
Nothing
Anything else you want to do, if you change the plans and want to come in for a different variance, then a different variance it is. But
I just don't think you'd have the structure that big because you're going to have driveways and garage and all that, but
You never
it
know.
definitely could be a lot bigger.
yeah, we're not trying to, I think that, and my guess is you've come in for a variance for your plans that you want to go build and not for something different. So
We
let's
have
just
no
give you
other
the variance
objective.
for the plans that you want to go build and not something
But
different.
Yeah,
what
no,
we're doing here today, correct me if I'm wrong, has nothing to do with the square footage on the lot.
Right.
That's all different codes and planning approvals and everything else. All we're talking about is we have too much pervious area based on the current code. He's come in for a building permit or wants one, and he has too much pervious area. The requirement is that only 25% of the lot can have impervious area.
Mhm.
Correct?
Correct.
And all we're saying is we're granting a variance to that number. Has nothing to do with square footage. Square footage allowed on that lot is handled in 10 other ways in the planning code, or probably more than that.
So yes and no. I think there's two things and kind of take a trip with me. I think if we're saying, what we're trying to say is you have a non-conforming situation that we want to make conforming to the code. We want to give you the ability to maintain your property, to maintain your structure, to apply for building permits, and we want to allow your existing site improvements to become legal, not legally non-conforming, just legal. So the grant of the variance is to say everything you have out there is now legal on your site, and that equates to 32.5%. In addition, we want to say, we also want to grant you this external expansion that the code requires for any structure being externally expanded. We want to permit you to be able to do that. I think what the third part that's being discussed is, do we want to future permit other external expansions within that 32.5% umbrella as long as the code permits it? And that's where Russ is bringing up those situations of, could he tear out 1,000 square feet of driveway and build 1,000 square foot expansion to connect to the home, right? And I think that's that's kind of the third question. And what I'm hearing is Russ wants to keep it very much to the one, just these approved plans and what's existing is permitted, and not go to the, we want to also grant you the variance to modify within the 32.5% lot coverage forever into the future.
And my understanding with staff recommendations and the approvals outlined, all that's covered.
That was
That's how I
my
see it
intent
too,
with
yeah.
the staff recommendation. I think the only thing is item number 4, where it also ties to your maximum structure and accessory structure footprint limitations.
That's irrelevant because we've already said it's only for these plans.
Correct. So that would be the one thing that
We can
probably
strike.
could be stricken, and then the rest would cover,
Agreed.
in my intent, what I'm hearing this
But
group
I just want
state.
But what I'm saying is all of this takes care of the concern that you're voicing. They can't build without coming back to, through this process, anything else.
Mhm.
Can they? I mean.
Because it's tied to these plans.
Yeah, well, this variance is for 132 square feet.
I think I can, my attempt at the amended motion never got seconded, so let me start over on that, because I think I've got it now. Got it.
Okay, go
All
ahead.
right, I move to approve the variance with the following conditions, and I'm gonna go ahead and say them. All right. The board grants a 7.5% maximum impervious lot coverage variance to allow 32.5% impervious lot coverage for and to accommodate the building plans consistent with the design represented in the building permit application set from KA Design Works dated April 2nd, 2024, not exceeding 132 square feet in area, period. And then my one other condition of approval is at such time as the existing structures, in parentheses, principal structure and accessory structure, close parentheses, are damaged or demolished pursuant to Unified Development Code Section 7.4.3, then property and all site improvements shall be brought into compliance with all zoning standards, including but not limited to maximum impervious lot coverage, period. And that's it.
You said or in there. Did you say or?
I was just reading what it says, I think.
I know, in the beginning, you said.
At the time, at such time as the existing structures, principal structure and accessory structure are damaged or
Oh, no,
demolished.
in number one, you're number one,
I
sort
didn't,
of.
there was no, I don't have an
Or.
or.
Okay, I just misheard you.
So
Okay.
basically, you're combining 1 and 2.
Yes, and then striking the rezoning part of 5.
Yeah, I'm striking
4,
3 and basically 3 too.
Yeah, because it was covered in 1
3 and 4 are struck.
and struck 4 because that doesn't seem necessary.
Janet has a question.
Second.
Okay, Mike?
Janet has a question.
Or Jack.
Okay. Discussion.
Janet has a question.
Janet?
Oh, thank you. Just, are these findings of fact recorded?
Yes.
Can I just make a suggestion that the plan set dated 4/2/24 are made an attachment to the findings of fact? So that way, it's a recorded document. So 15 years down the road, when building and planning is reading these conditions, they can easily find that plan set.
Sure, as long as you guys,
Are there?
um,
Sometimes it.
7.
7.
Well, mainly the site plan and the floor plan are the two I'm looking at.
Planning the impervious calculations or something.
Yeah.
I mean, you,
Yep.
leave it
Yep,
to you
we-
to
we
figure out
can-
which
we can
plans you
keep
need
it
to
down
attach.
to, typically we do
It's all
typically we do a
electronic
site
now.
plan with these.
It's all
so-
electronic now, so it doesn't matter.
In here.
Jared, to figure out which plans represent the motion.
Certainly. We can include those.
A recording cost.
Yeah, I mean, it gets.
All right.
Yeah.
Second, Mike? Yes. More discussion? No. Okay. time
I'm
for
good.
the vote.
If we can do a roll call vote.
Okay. You want me to do that? Or you want to do
Okay,
that?
we'll do
Kay?
the roll call vote.
Russ Quizwell,
No. And the reason why is I really think
No.
we need a legal opinion
Just to vote.
on if they could do my worst fear scenario.
Okay.
Mitch
Yes.
Haas, Jeff Dickinson,
Yes.
Mike Matheny,
Yes.
Mark Chain.
Yes.
Passes 4-1.
4-1.
You got it.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for your patience while we sorted through this our first time.
I have no intent of putting a 7,000 square foot place on there.
Looking all the way down the line.
Yeah, I can see that.
We've already covered it. I've been the applicant for many variances. That's part of what I do. If you attach the plans, the variances for those plans only. Yeah.
Thanks, sure.
Thanks,
Well,
guys. I appreciate you guys for.
Okay.
what you do and for addressing this. You guys
Thanks
have
for
a
your
good night.
patience.
Okay, thanks. All right, so.
I believe I,
Here it is, staff
Yep.
report time, staff comment time.
yes, I believe I have all that. I'm gonna check just the record to make sure I get one complete, and then I will reach out to you tomorrow for signature so we can get this all buttoned up. But I believe I have all your language already typed up, so.
Cool. That was good.
Staff update, really, I just want to touch base with you guys. This is the first meeting. Thank you. I know it's a little bit clunky. There's a little bit of learning. Couple housekeeping items. We picked 6:30 on Wednesdays, the fourth Wednesdays, because that's what we had done previously. I think the fourth Wednesdays work with other boards and commissions meetings that we have. Is 6:30 an appropriate time? Would you guys prefer 6, 7, 5:30? The time is kind of irrelevant. I just want to make sure it works for all of your schedules.
I have an appointment on Wednesdays at 6 o'clock that takes about 20 minutes and
Okay.
6:30 is just right for me.
Okay, cool. 6:30?
Fine then, yeah.
6:30 works.
Now, are we gonna meet
I don't
every
interrupt the
month? Are we gonna meet?
Nope,
When
only,
needed?
only as needed. And
Good.
so I will reach out to you guys well in advance when I have an application and double check on times. Typically, I'll say this month, that month, what works best for everyone's schedules, and we'll try to get something scheduled. So as soon as I hear something, receive an application, I'll reach out to you guys, but appreciate that. That's all I have. Thank
Anything in
you
the
all.
works? Is there anything coming, though?
I expect something, but it might not be till after the first of the year with holiday schedules. So other than that, I don't foresee anything else. If we can keep it to a couple meetings a year at most, that'd be lovely. That means we don't have a lot of variance needs and I somehow am doing my job. So awesome. Thank you all very much. No, none taken. Don't worry.
Board members, any board member want to say anything or comment?
Good discussion, everybody. Thanks.
Motion to adjourn.
Adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
At 8:50, second and.
We don't, you just can call it adjourned at any time as the chair. When you're done listening to people. Thank you all. Yeah, we'll come grab them.